Final Fantasy VII is a game that is not very special to me. I did play it when I was younger, but we didn't have a memory card, so I mostly just replayed the opening sequence a few times until that got boring. I've always loved the music and been familiar with the main characters, Cloud, Tifa, Sephiroth, you know. The entity of Final Fantasy VII is much larger than the game itself, so just through internet and gaming culture, I absorbed quite a bit of the game without ever actually playing through it myself. With that said, Final Fantasy VII Remake is very special to me. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and while I have a lot of favorite games, it still made the cut. And it did it without needing nostalgia. I know that opinions on the remake are all over the place, some people praising it, and some people saying it sucks, but for me, as COVID was setting in strong, finding a new and exciting world to explore in the remake quickly made it one of my favorites. And after 4 long years of waiting, Part 2 has finally arrived. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And it's underwhelming, which is frustrating. I wanted to like this game, man. I wanted to love it. I fully expected this game to blow my socks off and have me completely head over heels, but it just didn't. So, I guess I'm gonna try and explain why. The characters of this game are basically the driving force of the experience for a lot of people. You know, shooting an enemy with a machine gun is cool, but it's a hell of a lot cooler when the machine gun is attached to a guy named Barrett's arm, and when you kill the enemy, he goes, "Suck on this!" Man, I love Barrett. The characters are generally all lovable and well written. The dialogue seems like it was tweaked just a little bit from the remake to fit an American audience a little better. There are still some lines that don't particularly go over well, and some characters can get kind of annoying, namely Yuffie and Nanaki, but more on that in a second. But overall, it sounds a little bit less like a dubbed anime. It's very obvious that these characters are characters. It's very video gamey, but hey, who's playing a fantasy game for realism? Now that the party selection is unlocked for most of the game, you get to choose who to use for fighting, but that doesn't change the exploration, which is cool. So each side quest has its own primary party member that will engage in most of the dialogue alongside Cloud. Some are more interesting than others, ranging from simply having them talk to the NPC for you, which is most of the time relatively uninteresting and honestly just feels a little bit lazy, all the way up to having Barrett talk about how Tifa helped him become a better parent, which was awesome. Because of the way this works, we get to learn a lot more about most of the party, which is one thing I felt was missing from the remake, and we get to watch as the bonds between each character increase, which simultaneously increases the player's bond toward the characters. I especially loved Barrett's section of the story where he finds out his old best friend Dyne is still alive, only to quickly discover that he is much too far gone and not the same man he once knew. Barrett tells Dyne that his daughter Marlene is still alive as a last-ditch effort to bring him back to reality, but in the end, Dyne doesn't make it, and with his dying breath, he tells Barrett to carry that guilt, which is exactly what Barrett already condemned himself to doing, so it only solidifies the narrative that Barrett has already written himself into. Solid writing. Some not so solid writing is how they treated Red 13, or Nanaki. I like the idea that this tough character he was playing was more of a front, created from the cruel environment of Hojo's lab, forcing him into survival mode, making him a more mature, survivalistic version of himself. In theory, it works. His guard is up, he's acting different from his true self, wanting the others in the party to not think lowly of him because of his age or whatever his excuse was. I like the idea of it, but when it's executed, it feels like a complete opposite from his character. not just a different version. He doesn't sound or act anything like he did beforehand, and it's just very jarring to me and honestly almost ruins his character. I just don't really care about this new version of Red that's been sprung upon me. It's not the one I spent 30 hours with. It's possible to get used to him as a new character, but I'm not really that fond of him. His new voice and personality kind of just fall into a similar category as Yuffie, which just kind of tends to be a slight annoyance. Initially, I thought Yuffie was pretty awesome, but she just gets annoying. She's supposed to be the comic relief, I think, but she just kind of complains and whines most of the time. She has redeemable moments, but unfortunately, I just ended up getting a little tired of her, which sucks because I did like her in Intergrade. Another annoying thing that immediately takes me out of immersion is when the characters talk during the worst times. Most of the time it's interesting listening to their interactions, but sometimes it's just way out of pocket. Like, right as the temple is falling down towards the end of the game, the characters are running for their lives. And then...
Me too. Can't take it back, though.
That is so jarring. I mean, holy shit, you have bigger issues right now. You just softly say, I feel bad about the way we treated him. I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me. Also, as a side note, to me, his sacrifice didn't even mean anything because he has multiple bodies, so I guess, yeah, sure, he felt the pain, which is noble, but it just seems like a ploy to get you to like his character again after he betrayed us. I don't know. Anyway, speaking of breaking immersion, for me it was almost impossible to even get immersed in the world in the first place. There was hardly a moment that I was playing this game that it wasn't painfully obvious that I was playing a video game. This game suffers from the old room with shoulder-high walls problem that Gears and Uncharted did. Every part of the world is crafted to fit the video game. The video game isn't crafted around the world, which especially makes the overworld painful. It feels less like you're finding your way through an actual world and environment, and more like you're just walking through a set path that the developers created to look like an environment. It's almost impossible to get lost. The game tells you exactly what to do at pretty much all times. There's some puzzles that if you don't solve them in 10 seconds, a character will blurt out exactly how to solve it. There are deviations from the path which do lead to some chests containing items and stuff, but money and items are so easy to come by that halfway through the game it hardly feels worth it to go out of your way to grab the stuff, especially when there's hardly ever an interesting puzzle to solve or anything of actual substance standing in between you and said item. You just walk around a corner or slowly swing across a gap or sidle across a cliff and grab a high potion. Okay, it doesn't feel like I earned this item, it feels like I was willing to spend enough time to go grab it after I spotted it. In fact, almost all the puzzles in this entire game are just time wasters. It reminds me of the block pushing puzzles from early 3D Zelda, where the solution was figured out before you even started moving anything. It's not a puzzle game, so I get it, but it just adds on to the biggest problem I have with this game, which is how much it likes to waste my time. There's so many sections that are unnecessarily slow or tedious, so many mini-games, and a lot of them are mandatory or at least just gating items that are only obtainable through mini-games. Halfway through the game is where it started to break down for me, so let's talk about the open world, or the lack of. It's honestly pitiful. The open world has got to be my biggest gripe with this game. It is full of time-wasting, meaningless tasks that repeat 100 times throughout the game with little to no deviation. The only ones that get any deviation are the proto-relic quests, which can range from pretty good to just awful. I already started feeling burnt out by the time I finished the Grasslands and finished Chapter 2 with like 10 hours in the game already. And then when I got to Junon and realized that the world exploration quests were going to be the exact same thing again, I immediately let out a huge sigh of disappointment. The problem is that the game is trying to be two things at once. The main story is incredibly linear, but it throws this open world in to give you the illusion that the game isn't as linear as the story would make you feel. But the open world isn't even open. You just climb Assassin's Creed towers, get points of interest marked on the map, blindly follow the waypoint, do the repeated, recycled garbage activity, maybe get to hear an interesting line or two of dialogue from your characters, maybe get to hear 10 or 20 uninteresting lines from Mai or Chadley, rinse and repeat 40 times per region. That's it. That's all there is to it. Aside from the proto-relics, there is zero deviation in each region's quests. They don't bother to introduce a new type of quest or really even alter the way any of them work. So, yeah, these suck ass. By the time I hit Gongaga, I was completely checked out of all exploration. And after doing a few side quests, I hit the chicken quest and it all just broke down for me. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I know the end of the quest is rewarding in like a comical way, but to me, the blatant way this game wastes your time is almost offensive. There's nothing fun about so much of what they have you doing in this game. Riding 4 kilometers on the wheelie? Really? I know this stuff is optional, but the optional content makes up half the game. And I went into this game wanting to experience everything it had to offer. So that's what I did. At first, at least, until it burnt me out. Another big problem comes when this optional content is shoehorned into the non-optional segments. The minigames at Costa del Sol, the Chocobo Race, the content locked behind the minigames in the Golden Saucer, it all sucks. The section where you throw the bomb into the hole as Kate, why is this here? The throwing mechanic kinda sucks. It makes this whole entire section feel tedious, and again, these are almost all puzzles where you have them solved before you even begin to interact with them. Minigames are not only way too common, but they are just also poorly designed most of the time, and usually not that fun. Some are better than others, and when you have a partner beside you, it's nice to hear them shit-talking or cheering you on, but for the most part, I could really just do without it. It feels like this game is trying to emulate what Yakuza does, with a serious story mixed with a lot of exploration and silly minigames, but it's just doing it poorly. There's a huge dissonance when the characters are talking about rushing to the next area. Holy shit, we gotta go back to Gongaga, or whatever the case is. And then on the way there, you stop by 2 towers, climb them, analyze a crystal, help an old lady find her lost chickens. I understand these are all player choices, so you could just go straight to the story, which is exactly what I started doing about halfway through. But there's a sense of urgency in the main story that just makes it awkward to do a side quest or any exploration at almost any point. So, speaking of the story, I guess it's time I try and recap that. But before I do, I have a couple of things that didn't really fit anywhere in the video, so I just wanted to go over those really quickly. Firstly, I think the combat is pretty good. There's a couple of fights that feel a little unfair, and you fight the Turks a little bit too often, but for the most part, the combat's pretty good. Solid as the first one. I don't really think it's been improved upon quite enough to be worth a whole second game if you only like the combat, but as I said before, most people are here for the story and the characters. Also, there are scenes where Cloud is being controlled by Sephiroth or the Mako poisoning and does some pretty bad things like killing some Shinra soldiers or whatever, but they treat violence and the killing and the death in the story stands out so differently as to how they treat it in the gameplay. In the gameplay, we're over here killing hundreds of people, but now all of a sudden in the story, Cloud kills a couple people and everybody looks at him like he's crazy, he went over the line, overboard. It's just kind of weird and creates this dissonance between story and gameplay that kind of took me out of it and took a little impact out of some scenes, but overall not too offensive. So, in the first chapter, the Nibelheim flashback, it's fucking awesome. You get to learn about the backstory of Cloud, Tifa, Sephiroth. You get to play as Sephiroth. Damn, he feels good to play as. This chapter is awesome. Then we get a great dialogue scene between Cloud and Tifa, deepening their relationship, but also driving a wedge between them. Great stuff. The city of Calm is fine, I suppose. It's a decent little tutorial town. But anyway, Shinra attacks, so you have to leave, and then the main objective of the game becomes clear. Find Sephiroth. Simple enough, makes sense to me. So you follow the only lead you have, the robed men, through the mines and to Junon. The president offers you a deal, which is immediately taken back as Yuffie attempts to murder him. Then you follow the robed men across the ocean to Costa del Sol. And side note, I loved watching Cloud reprise his role in the Shinra militia and actually form a little bond with his regiment. I thought that sequence was actually pretty great. Anyways, the story pretty much stays the same for 90% of the game. You just follow the robed figures from place to place, and a couple of things important happen in between, like Cloud absolutely losing his shit and killing Tifa, but then she comes back because of plot armor, but that's fine with me. You need Tifa in this game. Anyway, we find the Gi. They tell us to get the black materia so that they can destroy the world, and we agree to find it, but also decide that we won't give it to them once we do. Obviously. But anyway, we find the key to the temple where the materia is being held, and then Kate Sith betrays the group, which was pretty heavily foreshadowed and didn't really come as a shock. But it turns out we didn't need the key anyways, because we just let Shinra open it and followed them inside. Anyway, then you get to play through a painfully linear dungeon sequence. You get to fight some decent bosses and the Turks, again, and find the materia. You take the materia, and the temple begins falling down Indiana Jones style. Putting it back doesn't work. Only option is to haul ass out of the temple, but Kate shows up out of nowhere to sacrifice himself to give us more time, which is fine, I guess. It's believable to me that he does have his heart in the right place. He's just had to do a bad thing for whatever reason. His reasoning was he knew that the temple would be dangerous, so he wanted Shinra to open it. I don't know. Doesn't really make sense to me. So, as we escape from the temple, Sephiroth is waiting outside, of course. Why wouldn't he be? He now begins to take control of Cloud, partially just his influence and power and their past, and then partially the Mako poisoning. It's been a pretty cool sub-story throughout the whole game, with a pretty interesting culmination here. And Cloud actually listens to Sephiroth and goes and takes the materia from Aerith. And we have to control him during this sequence, which initially I thought, man, this sucks. Another slow walk scene. This game loves to waste your time. There's so many sequences like this where you have slow control when there's hardly a reason to. But this is one that I have warmed up to a little bit. I do understand the reason. I think it's because Cloud is having to do something that he doesn't want to do. And now we, the players, are doing something we don't want to do. We're doing it slow, reluctantly. The first thing I said out loud was, man, do I really have to do this? So I understand where they're coming from this scene. However, like I said, there are a lot of scenes where you just slow walk. You have control when you don't need it. This could very well be a cutscene. There are many sequences like that in the game, but this is one I give them the pass on. Anyway, Cloud and Aerith fall and basically die. I guess they could have been saved by the Whispers. It's not really clear, but they're transported to this alternate universe, which ends up being the big reveal of this game, that there are alternate universes, and Sephiroth is trying to merge, unmerge, or otherwise control them. Which is kind of cool, I guess. It's a cool idea in my head that the original game, the original Final Fantasy VII, is still canon in this multiverse. I don't know. But anyway, this explains the Zack sequences that I haven't mentioned yet, but that's because I feel like they're mostly inconsequential in the big picture. I feel like it's just mostly fan service or something like that. It is cool to play as him and kind of see how he reacts to these new events that, as far as I know, haven't happened in the original game. But it is a multiverse at the end of the day, and multiverses are always convoluted, so we'll just have to see how they handle it. He was in the promotional material for the game. I expected him to be a much bigger part of the game, but in general, Zack's cool. It's fun to play as. His scenes are cool, but didn't leave much of a mark on me in the grand scheme. But anyway, we're in the Temple of the Ancients. Aerith is praying. Sephiroth comes down and, oh shit! Cloud saves her. Or almost? I don't know, it's kind of unclear, but it seems like it wants you to believe that she exists somewhere between the universes, according to the post-game cutscenes. But anyways, the fight with Sephiroth is pretty damn good. Strong ending as far as the combat goes, but the way the story ends is massively underwhelming. It just ends with, what do we do now? Go find Sephiroth, I guess. Which makes this entire game feel like pointless. I don't know, some things happened and ultimately Aerith is gone now, but other than that, what was accomplished by this game existing? Apart from deepening characters, gaining lore, the story is hardly advanced, our goal is exactly the same as it was at the beginning, now we just know a little more lore. It takes any weight out of the story that this game could have had and throws it away. I don't know, it feels kind of disappointing. The remake left me with a feeling of emptiness when I beat it. I was instantly thinking about restarting it, which I did very soon afterwards, which I almost never do, by the way. When I beat the remake, I instantly started to search for another game to fill the same hole that it did. I played Final Fantasy VIII and X. I tried to get into so many games, and while those two I named are great, they just didn't do what the remake did for me. Nothing did. Hence why I was so excited for Rebirth. But when I beat Rebirth, all I did was let out a sigh of relief that it was finally over. It took me nearly 60 hours to beat this game, as opposed to about 40 for the remake, and I could have spent another 20 or 30 hours if I completed everything I originally intended to. The experience feels stretched, time feels wasted, and efforts feel ultimately meaningless. But hey, maybe that's how they wanted you to feel. Maybe that's how the party feels. They've amounted to basically nothing since leaving Midgar, and Sephiroth has been one step ahead of them the entire time. Maybe this is exactly how you're supposed to feel.